Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every week. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home is Shaka Ssali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested very yesterday, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Well, Shaka, we have a lot to cover this week, but perhaps let's start with one sad news. Larry King, a broadcasting giant who literally owned the airwaves here in the United States and across the world for 25 years, passed on over the weekend. Maybe let's start there. I remember as a young person looking up to Larry King and I say, what does it take to be Larry King? And meeting you, Shaka, that sort of like reinforced my desire to become a reporter.
You really wanted to be Larry King, the king of talk radio, and of course, subsequently, the king of live television, global live television.
You're absolutely right, Shaka.
Well, he's the guy, of course, that made it to the major leagues in terms of broadcasting and everything you can think about. Because guess what? His name is very, very much present. Having hosted, in fact, began the Larry King show on CNN, I think back in 1985. Really, when CNN had actually just begun, and not many doubting Thomases, in fact, had given it even a chance for perhaps surviving even for more than 1 year. And this man who actually pioneered that international call-in television talk show, which was in a way really triggered by the kind of national radio talk show that he had done for many, many years from Miami in Florida. This man was able to actually hold the spot, dominate the international airwaves for 25 years. 25 years, the same person, the same name, in the same time. He was able to actually do that.
Shaka, when I've talked to a lot of your fans, young, old, across the world, they tell me that you and Larry King have a lot of similarities. Both of you guys have dominated that space, that international space. Especially for you, you've dominated that space of Africa with Straight Talk Africa, where you are in people's living rooms every week, and a lot of people talk about your interviewing style, skills, and the kind of guests you bring to the table. When I look at that, I look at Lion King, I say, you guys could not be very far from each other. You could perhaps argue that maybe you're brothers from a different mothers.
You know, to your point, Ndugu Paul, Larry King was obviously one of those broadcasting giants that I looked up to. But the other, and probably more influential to my style of broadcasting, was actually a guy that used to work for ABC television, Ted Couple, with Nightline. Ted Couple was my man. I mean, I remember, to be honest with you, even when Nightline began. This is when the Republic of Iran took the American diplomats as hostages in Tehran. That is when young Ted Couple, a man that I had admired when he was a television, diplomatic correspondent at the White House during the Jimmy Carter administration. And I started watching this guy. I just liked his style. I liked the way he talked. I liked his research. I liked what appeared to be simplicity He basically went about his business effortlessly. I liked his humility, especially, and I also liked the manner in which he interacted with his newsmakers. He listened so much, but no one could probably be a great listener than Larry King.
A lot of people say that Larry King, even himself, he never wanted to refer to himself as a journalist, but rather as somebody who is there to give people a platform to express themselves.
There are some doubting Thomases when it comes to journalism skills and as far as Larry King is concerned. And so they used to, in fact, jokingly refer to him as the king of softball. Larry King, really for him, is not the type of guy that studied journalism formally. He's the type that exploited his natural gifts. He says, in his own words, not mine, that he was an incredibly curious person. I think when it comes to these measurements of intelligence, Larry King, probably like me, may not really have had much when it comes to IQ, intelligence quotient. But when it came to curiosity quotient, when it came to passion quotient, when it came to environmental quotient, social skills, facilitating for whoever had the opportunity to be his guest, he was the kind of guy that did not have peers. He did not have peers. He pretty much knew how to open the microphone for the guests in a manner that was very sophisticated. That is, I think, one style that I have actually failed to learn or to adopt from him. I'm the type of guy that listens very, very carefully, very intently. There's no question about it because when I was studying communication, I realized that when it comes to communication, you are talking about a dual carriageway. It's a two-way track, two-way street. It's not one way. And so I learned that style very much earlier, that skill set, and it has really become extremely, extremely helpful. But when it comes to opening the microphone for a guest, it becomes very, very difficult for me. I'm the type of guy who, like Ted Kapo, I actually like to engage in a conversation that is journalistically filtered. Meaning, really, I like to interact. I like to ask you a question and listen to you. And having listened to you, you give me the opportunity to come up with a follow up. You know, that kind of stuff. And frankly, I also like to make sure that each interview I do, each show I do, is a means to another one, is not necessarily an end in itself. Because it's not about me in the group. It's about the audience. I respect my audience 100% out of 100. And I also equally respect my newsmakers 100% out of 100%. And so my role is very simple. My role, in fact, is to help my newsmaker interact with my audience in a manner, as I said earlier, that is journalistically filtered, so that he is able or she is able to explain whatever things we are talking about in a manner that is very easily accessible by my audience.
what kind of advice would you give to young journalists who are coming up, and they look at you, they look at the likes of Larry King, they look at the likes of Peter Jennings, Jim Lehrer, all those great journalists who have had the opportunity to really to be at the center of broadcasting journalism? What kind of advice would you give to those young people who want to be in your shoes?
I think that what I would say to them is that first and foremost, they really need to identify what they want. If it is broadcasting, let them go for it. If it is print journalism, being a columnist, and they are gifted with very good writing skills, let them go for it. If they have what they call the deep radio baritone voice, let them go for the almighty radio. Go for something that you have developed a passion for it. Because once you actually do that, the trick is that you don't actually perform or even look at it as if you are doing a job. It is as if, in fact, you are basically engaged in a sort of hobby. And that is how, in fact, I evolved into broadcasting. I was supposed to be a documentary filmmaker when I came out of the University of California, Los Angeles, a world-class film school that has taught so many people that went on to dominate Hollywood and beyond. So I think I would tell them to read as much as they can. I would tell them to research the subject before they actually meet somebody and they are trying to interact in a manner that is journalistically filtered. I would tell them to work very, very hard. I would tell them, in fact, to be the best that they could be at whatever they are trying to do. Because you know what? More is better than less. And I would tell them that they need the necessary discipline and that they need to focus like a laser beam, and that they always need some degree or measure of humility. They need to put themselves in a situation where they challenge themselves in the sense that at least each time they meet someone, and each day they meet other people, or each day they meet people, they will be able to learn something that they could add on what they think they already know. And that they should never allow the possibility of being complacent. Never allow the possibility of thinking that they know.
Let's move on. Let's go to a peaceful transfer of power. We witnessed some history this week when President Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th President of the United States. A lot of people would argue that this was not a peaceful transfer of power. For the first time in a long time, what we saw in Washington was something like we've seen in other parts of the world, but not where basically the whole city was taken over by the military. And a lot of people have argued that maybe for the first time in the US history, this was not a peaceful transfer of power. When you think about when John Adams was inaugurated as the second president of the United States, George Washington reached out to him and congratulated him and wished him success. But in this particular case, we didn't see, for example, President Trump reach out to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and congratulate them and say, you know what, I wish you success.
Yes, indeed. You know, at least for the first time in many decades, the United States did not rise to the occasion of what one great American president, the late Ronald Reagan, characterized as the shining city on the hill. The American democracy did not measure up to what Reagan had hoped for. But at the end of the day, even if it in fact ends up being a peaceful transition with a huge asterisk to it, it was still nevertheless at the end of the day a smooth transition of power from one administration to the other, even with the key person, President John Donald Trump, actually being MIA, missing in action. And like it or not, the man who served as his vice president, Mike Pence, I think filled essentially the empty shoes. I remember seeing him and the lady who had succeeded him as Madam Vice President, Kamala Harris. I remember her and her husband. And here I should point out that she's not the only person by any means that in fact made history. She made history, of course, as the first female vice president of the United States of America ever. And of course, you could also add that female happens to be an African American / Indian vice president. Her husband, Doug Ndiho, also makes, in fact, remarkable history. Yes, I saw the two accompanying the outgoing vice president, Mike Pence. A man, by the way, on January 6th, who had been identified by the men, some call them hooligans, who formed what is called an insurrection that pretty much succeeded in invading and taking over temporarily Capitol Hill. That man, Mike Pence, was in fact in serious trouble because some of those people were in fact shouting his name, "Where is he?" Apparently, they actually wanted to assassinate him. They actually wanted to hang him and wanted also to kill the speaker, your friend Nancy Pelosi, and wanted to kidnap some other members of the Congress, members of the House of Representatives, and some senators to vote. But he succeeded, Mike Pence, in playing a role that could have been played by his boss, who abdicated his duty.
What lessons can people, especially people in Africa, people who have been struggling with these transitions of power in places where countries are democratically challenged, what lessons can they learn from this example of the United States?
There are certain responsibilities, especially when it comes to national responsibilities, where you are talking about an individual being in control or in charge of millions and millions of people, that we should not, in fact, trust in those individuals coming through for us. That rather, what we should look at is building strong institutions. Because strong institutions have, for example, demonstrated very, very clearly that they can, in fact, have resilience, and in fact can deliver. Because in fact what happened here in Washington, D.C., the political de facto capital of the world, if it wasn't up to the permanent and strong institutions, there could probably have been a political catastrophe here. I think that the founding fathers of these great United States of America couldn't have really seen it better. They had a great vision. They were great visionaries in the sense that they did not trust the ability of the individuals to sustain the experiment they had just begun. And therefore, they decided that rather than trust the individuals to sustain that particular experiment of democracy, which some would call social, economic, political, and cultural justice for all of us, they would rather put in place specific institutions so that they can actually play the role of checks and balances. And they play the role of checks and balances precisely because they actually hold co-equal powers when it comes to the United States government. And you have the executive, for example, which is led by the president. And then you have the Congress, which has the lower house, as the House of Representatives, which is led by a speaker. And then you have the Senate, the upper house, which is led by a senior senator called President Pro Tem. And then you have the judiciary, led by the Chief Justice. Those three branches, Ndugu Paul, they actually hold co-equal powers. No single power is above the other two. And so they basically complement and supplement one another by checking and balancing one another. And we can see that that experiment has survived for more than 2 centuries ago. And I think that we can actually put our money on this experiment to take us a little bit further than it has so far, because it has incredible resilience. If it wasn't probably the magic of those institutions, January 6th could have in fact succeeded, and we probably could have joined the history alongside what was once the Soviet Union. And so I think there is something to be said about the American founding fathers when they came up with the vision of making sure that they put in place strong institutions rather than putting their faith in strong men, like it happens to be on our mother African continent.
You bring up a very good example. Let's go to the strong men here. Let's start with a comment from Augustine Nyamfoa. Congratulations, President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We look forward to a good relationship with Africa in strengthening our democracy. But perhaps you are not going to be like your predecessors who support the likes of Theodore Obiang in Equatorial Guinea, Paul Biya in Cameroon, Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, Paul Kagame in Rwanda. These are leaders who have been around for a long time, but thanks to the United States support, these leaders have imposed themselves on the will of their people.
My brother Augustine, I think that your point is well made. But I would like to suggest to you, just in case you have probably not come across a great book that would explain to you the secrets of world politics. And that is a book that I call a classic by a professor, Hannes Morgenthau. He wrote a book which says countries do not have permanent allies or friends and do not have permanent adversaries or enemies, but rather countries have permanent interests. So when the interests change, the alliances keep shifting. And so countries, one thing you should know, Augustine, is that countries are very selfish. They basically deal with other countries on the basis of what they can benefit from that type of relationship. I also had the National Security Advisor of President Biden talk about how their administration is clearly going to be in a position where it is going to work with its partners to make sure that fundamental human rights are observed. As a matter of fact, he said that when he was referring to a case in the Republic of Uganda. And so it seems to me that we may very well see a significant difference from the previous administration in the manner in which it interacted with Africa in particular and the rest of the world in general.
Let's go to Henry Orambi. After the events that happened in the United States on January 6, does the United States have the moral authority to lecture other countries, for example, countries that are democratically challenged in Africa, about democracy?
Henry, I think that your observation or question is spot on. I think the United States administration under President Joe Biden is going to work very, very, very hard, because clearly when you think about the events that occurred on January 6th, its work is cut out for them. They are going to have to be in a situation where they have to go beyond simply talking the talk, because the international community will probably judge them by the manner in which they actually walk the talk, so that they can actually walk the walk rather than simply talk the talk. I think what needs to be is for people to organize and not agonize, organize and mobilize, so that eventually whatever kind of help you get complements or supplements what you have already done on the ground. Because at the end of the day, you are the giants really on your territory.
Shaka, on that note, let's end it there. Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome, Ndiho.